Welcome to Sales Mavericks and Marketing Rebels, the show where bold business owners, savvy entrepreneurs, and sharp thought leaders push boundaries, challenge conventions, and redefine success in sales and marketing. And now your hosts, Nicholas Luisi and Marco Salinas.
I am super excited about this one. We have the great Melanie French, who is a dynamic sales leader and runs French Sales Solutions and is a fractional sales leader. So she does a lot of the work similar to I do. Probably does it 1,000 times better. But I am so excited to have a conversation with her about what she's seeing going on in sales, what she's seeing in 2025, problems maybe that companies, small businesses are having on the hiring side, on the sales process side. So we're going to get to that. But right before we do that, we're gonna pay the bills, folks. This episode, as every episode, is brought to you by Pina Colada Media. I just love saying that word, Pina Colada Media. It reminds me of that song from the 70s, if you like pina coladas. They do everything for you. They make the show seamless. You show up, you look pretty, not as I don't look as pretty as Melanie, but you just do what you have to do, and they take care of all the back scenes for everything. So folks, if you want to have a podcast, and every business owner should have a podcast, reach out to the folks at Pina Colada Media. They're going to treat you right. They're going to do everything right. And you really will be happy about having a conversation with them. All right, Melanie. So you're on the hot seat. What are you seeing in the sales arena for 2025?
Good question. First off, super excited to be here. So thanks for having me. I think 2025, this question in general comes up every year, like what's on the horizon,
Sure,
right?
sure.
I actually, in all fairness, I kind of hate this question, and I'll tell you why. Mostly because it alludes to this, what's the latest and greatest, like kind of chasing the shiny object thing. And the thing that I have found in most organizations is they're missing the basics. And so the companies that I tend to work with, when I go in, they might be interested in, we'll call it the newfangled greatness, or what's AI, or
Sure.
whatever the newfangled word is. But I think when it really boils down to it, they're not functioning at a base level that's high enough to really even begin to think about trying to incorporate some of those cool new advanced type things into their workflows or their organization, because they're just living day to day, from a sales perspective, from a technology perspective, and that creates a inability to really leverage some of that stuff. So for that reason, I don't love that question.
I think your answer's spot on. I don't have it close by, but I usually, whenever I'm doing a kickoff with a new client or whenever we're doing a team meeting, I kind of hold up a football, and I'm the Vince Lombardi of sales leadership, right? Gentlemen, this is a football. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a football, right? We're gonna do the basics really, really, really well because of exactly what you said. Is everybody's always chasing the shiny object? I probably see that a little bit more on the marketing side when we
For
get
sure.
into the deep weeds on marketing for our clients. But really, it's the basics, right? It's the blocking and tackling, filling your pipeline every day, which I think I want to talk to you a little bit about because I don't see enough of that happening with sales teams. And I think that leads to all of the problems, right? Is that consistency of making the outbound, whatever the outbound is. I'm a fan of the phone first, right? But also, utilizing LinkedIn and email and just really doing good account research. And so you shook your head in agreement with me, I think. So let's talk a little bit about that because I just don't see enough. Two points to this. I don't see enough of prospecting and pipeline filling being done, especially on the AE side. And I think we're doing a horrible disservice to the future generation of salespeoples by incorporating SDRs and not having what I call cradle to grave account executives that could really fill their own pipeline and funnel. Because my guess is eventually that SDR is probably going to change dramatically or go away. So that's a lot to unpack, I realize. But what are your thoughts on that?
I definitely agree in a lot of respects on the prospecting, and I think as you look at the we'll call it the roles and responsibilities related to like a full cycle AE or an SDR. I think there is a shift towards the full cycle AE. I think that the SDR role to me sometimes feels like a, how do you describe it? Almost like a silver bullet or a quick fix that they're trying to put in
Sure.
for the rest of the team that isn't good at prospecting or isn't prospecting. And so they're trying to, I'm going to call it, circumvent that problem that they have because they don't want to deal with that. And they want to solve the problem by inserting another body in the process. And I think it can work in some instances, but in general, it seems to work best in, well, and honestly, in more of a transactional type
Okay.
space.
So not a long
Because
cycle, not a long
I think
sale.
it's very difficult for an SDR because usually they're low level, both in probably company knowledge, business acumen, however you want to describe that. They don't have the clout to go get a solid meeting for the most part with a true high level contact for a you know 5 figure, 6 figures plus solution. So
Sure.
when we're talking about big deal sizes and complexity in the buying cycle and complexity in the decision makers and a broad set of decision makers involved in the process, they just don't have the insights, the clout to be relevant to those people. And so they just come across as just another salesperson, sending out their LinkedIn message, sending out their emails, like doing their thing. And they're certainly doing a lot of activity, but if their goal is to get a meeting, for the most part, I don't think they have the clout to do so. And it's and so the companies try to solve a problem by putting that in place, but not really realizing that that is probably not going to get you like the end result that you want.
Where you want to go. Um, you grew up as I think I did, or I know I did, and I think you did, kind of carrying your own bag, right? Kind of building your own pipeline, growing your sales, or did you grow up in an SDR environment when you were an individualized producer? I know you were a sales leader, but you came in as an individual producer, I believe.
Yeah, I really had my own thing. I guess was to describe it. I in my world, I actually worked with um, an outside salesperson who was a bit more of a, I'm going to call him traveling roadshow type person, where they did product presentations. We were in the apparel industry. And
Okay.
so um, they were out on the road visiting clients. I didn't do a lot of face to face. I did a lot of phone based. So I was more of the inside rep, but I really ran the account. I really was the one managing the relationship, and they kind of showed up every so often to do a product line presentation.
Okay.
So it was, but it was really driven through, my efforts. I had a territory and a list, and I was calling on those people.
Every day. Do, do on that note, and I was actually just speaking to another sales leader on our last episode, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, I got a call from one of my account executives that was on the road," and I'm like, it's interesting. Are people putting sales reps back on the road, right? That field sales rep, are you seeing that being adopted? I mean, obviously COVID, that's gone, and it did its damage, but are you seeing people kind of readjusting to that and putting people back on the road?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Do you
There's
recommend that to a lot of your clients? Because that's fascinating that we're going to go back to that, because we kind of wrote the kiss of the death of the field salesperson, I think, and now as with everything, we swing the pendulum too far one way. Now we bring it back to the to normalize it.
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization and what they're selling
Yeah.
and who they're selling to. So, is it, I think in like the SMB space where they're selling to SMBs, it absolutely is a valid, like those types of people. If you're in a local area where you're geographically, hey, I serve the, Ohio area and
Yeah.
that's who their target market is, certainly that they have reps and they've kind of always they have they have virtualized some of the stuff, but
Okay.
they are definitely still face to face and interested in that interaction. And I do think that face to face in general, like, can be very powerful. Like, I personally don't sell face to face for the most part. Like, when I'm talking with clients, almost everything I do is virtual. I work with my clients virtually for the most part. But I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer there. I think it depends on the industry, the company culture, the culture of the people that you're selling to, and how you can craft the most effective strategy.
Yeah. One of the things that I was thinking of when you said something that's that's interesting is you made the decision to say, hey, listen, all my interaction for the most part is going to be virtual, right? With the client base that your book of business, your clients that you work with. I think mine is too. There's a couple clients that are really localized that like to see me maybe on a quarterly basis for planning, and I'm fine with that. Most of my sales teams that I work with and that I manage are virtual sales teams. And you're shaking your head yes too. And I'm curious what you think of, because I think that there's a lot of learning that we lose out without having those sales floors of yesteryear, right? Like you could hear, Johnny say something 5 times, and I could kind of lean over and say, Johnny, what, you're saying this isn't working. He's like, oh yeah, it works. I think we're losing a lot of that by having all of our reps work virtually, and that's my personal opinion. And you're not a shrinking violet, so if you think I'm wrong, you'll tell me. But what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that. I think that in today's world, the things that used to just, I'm going to say, happen in quotes, like, because, just because you were there and by nature of being there, it happened. Those types of things have to be intentionally crafted these days. So
Yeah.
if you want someone to get exposure to those calls, you've got to, really put a focus around recording calls, pulling together good ones, putting together a platform and a virtual training platform that allows that listening. And then, really, I don't want to say force, but really adapt your culture to embrace that. Because otherwise there is definitely a missed source of learning. And I don't think most companies are very good at that. Like that shift into virtual. I think everybody wants to be, people say they want to be virtual, companies want to be flexible, and I am an all for that, and in support of all of that. But I think there is definitely a growing gap in terms of the learning and development and how you intentionally upskill your people, because it doesn't just happen. And not that it just happening was ideal in the past, but at least something was right. I mean, it was like, oh, I hung out and listened to so and so talk for 2 days, and that's how I learned, right? um, that wasn't ideal either, but it was better than what happens sometimes today, which is you have these reps sitting at their home office, maybe at their kitchen table, probably,
Yeah, yeah,
depending on
right, right.
depending on how how serious they are about their, career and, like, just their work environment, and, creating a space for success. But it's definitely a major shift, and there are definitely challenges.
I'm laughing on that because when like everything, the whole world got deployed, right, and COVID, and we got sent home. I was, I had been working towards. I was in a private equity owned company, and I was working towards exiting and creating sales performance team. And so one of our clients, I'm looking, and I'm like, what are you working on? He goes, I got a Yeti cooler and I'm sitting on my bed. I'm like, well, we got to fix that, right? So
Oh
let's go to
man.
Amazon. And, so, I mean, like by the end of the day, you're just going to be exhausted from hunching over and typing, right? So I was laughing at him about how people are set up. The other thing too that I worry about, that you used to be able to see on the sales floor, and as a sales leader, you know, we really are managing the hearts and the minds of our people as well as their production. And when Nick was having a bad day, or maybe Nick had three really bad calls in a row, I could almost see that, right? Or my team lead could see that because his body language is changing. Maybe he's, not making calls because he's just something's going on. And we just don't have that ability when everybody's virtual anymore. All right. So we realize, and I agree with you, that most companies, I think they think they're great on training, but they're not. Now, do you programmatically try to put, like a training program in place with your clients? And what does that look like if you do?
Yeah, so I really look at things from a, I'm going to say, a system process perspective first. And so
Okay.
I'm looking at like sales process, but also just like how are you going about all of the different sales related activities within the business, and what should those be? How are those flowing through your CRM? How is that helping you or not helping you? And so from a training perspective, once those pieces are in place, I'm really trying to figure out what are the skill gaps that the team has related to being able to execute those things. So I'm not necessarily like, I don't necessarily do sales training as like a just a blanket thing. There's certainly entities out there that offer such services. I'm more focused on if there's a piece of the process that is failing greatly or there's a huge challenge somewhere, that's where I'm going to say, okay, we're going to put some process around it. But then we're also going to do some training around how do you actually execute this? What are things that are happening or not happening that need to be um, improved upon or just started?
And I hate broad brushes, right? Of like, oh, this is what I see all the time, or this is where I see all the time. There are times where there are like college programs that focus on sales that I see young salespeople coming out, and I'm very, very, very impressed by what they've been trained up throughout college, right? And
Oh,
what they've done.
interesting.
And in one of my organizations, we had two sellers come out of DePaul University, which was, we were in Chicago, and DePaul University, they had a sales program, and they had to have, even if it was an internship, they had to have X amount of hours on the phone, X amount of hours in product presentations or demos or anything like that. So I'm very, very impressed by that. And I think, you know, we many many business owners that I deal with are always looking for that golden arrow, right? That one salesperson that's got a book of business, or that's just magic that comes in. I have yet to see them find that. I don't know. Maybe you have in Ohio
No.
haven't seen that either. But so with that being said, you really do kind of say, okay, where are the gaps? And are there consistent gaps that you see in the companies that you work with, or is it all over the board?
I mean, it's definitely there's all, everybody's got their own set of challenges for sure, but I think, there's a couple of things that really stand out. One being their the way that they've operationalized their CRM or not,
Okay.
usually not. So they have this CRM, they probably pay a pretty penny for it, but they don't really know how to leverage it in a way that helps make them more efficient. So they see it's more of an information repository, a lot of times filled with a bunch of garbage. And so because they don't have a good opera they have not operationalized their CRM in a way that is functional. They are lacking a lot of visibility, reporting, just general business management things that are really a struggle. So they start doing things on spreadsheets, and then nobody wants to use the CRM, but they've paid, 10, 20, $30,000 for this CRM system, right? That's,
And the consultant to implement it for
yes,
them,
that's
right?
been,
It's up
yeah,
at another zero, right?
yes.
And
So that piece is definitely a challenge. And then, because they are lacking a lot of that visibility and really real data to run the business, they really don't have an effective grasp on their sales management in general. The people, their forecast, their pipeline, like all of that is just a bunch of blurry mumbo jumbo because they don't have the data behind it. And so that is a challenge. And so then they're just kind of floating in the abyss, hoping things are going to work. Um, and and so that's a big challenge. And
opium.
then, yeah. And then the third thing I would say is anything related to hiring is a huge challenge. And almost everyone that they don't, they have people that have been around for a long time that they've not necessarily ever held accountable. They don't have the metrics, but they have this feeling that the person is not necessarily earning their keep or is not necessarily right, but they don't actually know. They just think, and it might be true, but
Right.
at the end of the day, like they're also scared to get rid of them because
They're terrified. They're
they
terrified.
don't have anything in place because they don't know how to hire people, hire salespeople, which
Yeah.
I mean, hiring in general is a sales process. And hiring salespeople is like you add a whole nother layer onto that, right? This is not just regular hiring. And if you don't know what you're looking at, it's so easy to hire the wrong fit. And they're scared of that too because they don't want something worse than what they have.
Yeah, opportunity cost, right?
Yeah.
You've now burnt 3 months or so with the wrong player. It's fascinating. The more and more I talk to very seasoned sales leaders or, sales leaders with a fractional um, book of business, they all kind of revert back to it's a lot of it is the sales hiring, right? And the lack of a process and the lack of bringing somebody through a systemized process. And you said something on that, we had somebody else talking about it's you can't and I know the HR people are gonna poo-poo this. You can't hire salespeople the way that you hire the marketing person. We'll pick on
Oh,
marketing,
yeah.
right? It's just
100%.
different, right? They're just different in so many different ways. And I remember I was like not too long ago, I was doing a reference check on a seller. He was a great seller for me.
Uh-oh.
He was a number one producer, and the HR person was asking me these questions, and I'm like, whoa, whoa! Here's the questions you really want to ask if I can help you out. Like, did he hit quota? Did
Was she
he
like, did
do
he work
all?
there?
Yeah, like, it was like, well, did he show up on time? I'm like, well, okay, you're asking HR questions, right? And so that's nothing wrong with it. I'm not, we got to have the checks and balances in the HR area. But I really think that hiring people is a art form and is a science, and a business owner just doesn't have that capacity because they're not doing it on such a grand scale, right?
It's hard.
And and
I
it's
mean,
hard
it
and
sucks.
and you have your heart broken and you
100%.
it just you have your heart broken so many times, and it's just such a long process. And you know
I've been burned
and
enough times to
yeah, it's fun, isn't it? It's like, oh my gravy, and so walk me through that. You're like, what do you do? What's your process look like?
Yeah, so first off, I'm a huge fan of assessments in
Okay,
the hiring
who do you
process.
like?
TTI is the assess
TTI. Okay, so DISC and TTI. Do you
yeah,
use OMG ever?
I have not.
Okay.
I'm not, and again, I'm not necessarily opposed to other assessments. TTI was just in my corporate career. We leverage them heavily. I know them well. I know what I'm looking for, and I know how to get what I want out of the assessment and in the hiring process. So, right. So I like the TTI because it has a behaviors and motivators component. Behavioral is how you do what you do, and the motivation is why you do what you do. And so the why is really the most important thing that I'm looking for because I really want someone who is motivated um, in sales based on a thing called their utilitarian drive, which is their, resourcefulness, their interest in money, the ROI creation kind of behind the scenes. Like that's the thing that drives them. And so if you don't have that in sales, it's not that you can't be successful. It just means that TTI has a ton of research behind this, but you have a much better shot of having a successful outcome if you have someone that scores well in that particular part of the test and they have a whole bunch of science and research behind it. So when I'm doing assessments and like I'll review a resume, and if assuming they pass that baseline test, I start with the assessment. If they don't get the score that I need on the assessment, I move on. I've
Right.
been
So you run them through. resume? Do you have them do like a video or a call first of say somebody just to kind of introduce yourself? Just one is to see if they follow instructions,
Oh,
right? And they
yes,
could
yes.
read.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah. So we would do a quick baseline like phone interview of just like,
right.
hey, here's the job. Hey, this is sales. Hey,
Yeah.
sales isn't for everyone.
Hey,
Are
you got
you,
to pick up the
yeah,
phone. Hey, you got to, yeah,
here's
right.
what's going to be required.
Yeah.
What brief questions are you still like, are you still aligned that this job is potentially for you? Right.
Okay.
All things there align. Then I do the assessment. If they pass the assessment, they move into the next, like more of a in-depth interview process, which
Okay.
to me would be a usually a face to face, and then basically a final interview.
Do you do a mock sales environment, a mock sales interview, like to have them sell you something? That's not something as try to sell me this pen, but
Um, it depends on the role, and
okay.
I not sometimes I've done that and sometimes not. I don't know that that particular piece is necessarily the most important. It's more about the process. Like, what questions am I asking? Am I asking the same thing to every candidate? Am I really digging into their background, their quota attainment, what they
Yeah.
were selling, who they were selling to, what their specific role was, and what they had to actually execute against? That's really what I'm interested in, because I want to understand if how they did in the past and what they were doing, how closely that resembles what I'm going to need them to do.
I'm a firm believer that every high performer knows exactly what their numbers were and where they were in quota containment and where they were vis-a-vis the rest of the sales team. If that was public knowledge, right? If they knew that. And whenever I get somebody and I'm interviewing them and they say, they don't know that, right? That's a red flag for me.
Yep.
They're hiding something in my mind, and so challenge me if I'm wrong. If you think I'm wrong, but I always use that as kind of one of the hurdles we have to jump over.
I would agree with that. I think the bigger challenge is the number of people you get that are like that though. And how do you sort through those and maybe find a diamond in the rough that might have potential but hasn't necessarily had the experience level that would generate that result, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, then
because
I
I
think you have
think,
to look into their background, right? What
yep,
if they had something they had to overcome, right? Do they have tenacity? Is there a tenacity score? I like your utilitarian, right? So somebody listen. The road is never straight. I mean, listen. I wish it was easy every day. It's not, and I kind of put my head in the pillow every night, and say a little prayer, and hopefully it gets a little easier the next day, and it never does. And so, um, you kind of look for those type of things with folks when you're interviewing for some of your clients. And this might not be a fair question because every client's different, but are you ever hiring non-sellers, right, or people that are maybe entry level and bringing them into different roles and kind of creating a process and a system that somebody could be successful in, and it may be their one of their first couple sales roles?
yeah. So my entire career in leadership in the corporate world was surrounded around that. I hired almost exclusively recent college grads and or relatively entry level people, and we built out a very large team, multiple teams related to that, and getting them up and running, proficient in a sales skill, right? Or sales, giving them, upskilling them. And, we had it was almost I always called it both it was a customer development program, but also a employee development program. So we
All
had our
right.
customer base segmented based on various various criteria, potential, all this kind of stuff. And we deployed people based on where they were at in this program against these various segments. So the most high profile or coveted type leads went to a much higher skill set team, but we had more like we had, which is a great problem, right, that most people don't have. We had a lot of leads, so we almost couldn't handle them all, like, right, we had to prioritize and segment, so the attention they got, was prioritized based on that, and flushed or pushed out to the various groups based on their skill level at the
Were
time.
these inbound leads or were they just, leads that were in the database that just needed to be touched?
That second one. They
Okay.
were like, we worked in a pretty specific market to where
Yeah.
we sold to a certain segment. So we either people knew of us and had inquired with us previously, or we knew who some of the players were. We certainly had incoming leads, which we called, they were basically new customer setups.
Gotcha.
So, and then we ran them through a very specific process as well.
It's the process, isn't it? The longer I do this, it's all about the process.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, if you have in general, and I get this, I had a client recently that really wanted me to, um, I did an evaluation of the team. We went through the whole TTI assessments, and he's like, so who would you fire? And I was like, I can't really like, I, I mean, certainly I have some assumptions and some
Yeah.
opinions here, but like, honestly, I've seen so many people that if you put some process and structure in place, creates massive success. Like, just because you ask, they start to do things in a systematic way, assuming they're willing and able to comply, right? And if they aren't, that's a whole nother conversation. But I'm not necessarily willing, like, I don't go into a company and say, like, fire all your salespeople, they all suck. It's more about, okay, what are we doing systematically that's not working? And how do we get that fixed so that the people can then become reasonably successful regardless?
Or
I
the
mean,
vice
A
versa,
players,
right? What
yeah,
are we doing well? How do we replicate it so everybody
that
does
too.
it,
That
right?
too. Yeah.
I always say that I really think that my practice really is like the theory of constraints. Like, what are the constraints in the sales? And it's always that there isn't a process that people are following. The systems aren't in place, right? Everybody's kind of selling things a little bit differently. Maybe you get them trained up and then they revert back to the mean, right? They kind of bounce their way back to the old way of selling. So it's that constant need to be focusing on improving the process and systems, right? So we've never really evolved this Deming approach to sales, right? If you read the goal, right? It's just, what's the process and how do we maximize the process? And people will come and go. I loved your analogy of, hey, what a great system that you could start plugging in young raw talent into that and get great results. I think that's every business owner's dream.
It's hard. I mean, it was a lot of evolution, training. A quick story about assessments, though, related to that. That's really where I learned how to hone in on the assessments. And I would say the first couple years, like maybe the first 2 years, we experimented quite a bit. And it was
Sure.
interesting because it was like, well, why is this person no good? Or this person's not even making the minimum level of phone calls. And we really pushed the accountability on, like, you got to hit the minimum activity. And we
Yeah.
fired people for not doing it, which most organizations do not. But we really committed. And as we hired, the interesting thing was, I there were a couple instances where I did not stick to my process, and I hired a guy who, he made a good case. Like, we did the phone interview. He failed the assessment, not horribly, and we sent him like the rejection letter, and he got mad about it. Like, right, he got mad that we didn't move forward with him because of the assessment, which, you know, at the time I was like, he had a compelling, he had a really good response. I actually appreciate it. Most people don't, they just kind of move on. So the fact that he actually responded and kind of pled his
Yeah. It
case,
shows
I
you
was
some
like, huh.
tenacity.
So I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
all right, let's give this a shot. So we brought him in, we face to face interviewed him. He interviewed great. We hired him. We actually, in that role, we also did a shadowing. So where they sat with somebody who was doing the job as part of the interview process, they knew exactly what they were getting into. Dude shows up, we're day 2 or 3 in new hire training, right? We had a pretty intensive 2 week training. This is day 2 or 3. Comes in and is like, actually, I don't think this is for me. I was like, are you kidding me? Ever since then, I have literally refused to even entertain anyone who does not
Pass.
meet the criteria of the assessment.
Yeah.
Learned my lesson. And I will tell you what, the the performance level of those teams was through the roof. I mean, over by the time we got the whole thing over the several years in, it was very rare that we did not have somebody performing. And if they weren't performing, they were they were on their way out very quickly,
Yeah.
simply because the organization had adopted this culture. So it wasn't like if you weren't doing the thing, you were the odd one out. Where a lot of cultures I see where stuff just kind of gets swept under the rug for a
Oh
long
yeah,
time.
yeah.
And so they're not breeding high performance with that. It
Uh,
sucks. It's not very fun. I'll tell you that. I mean, you've got to have tough conversations and hold the line, but it's so worth it when you get to the other side.
Do you think it's easy? No, you were a performer, right? You were a producer and you moved into sales management and then sales leadership and beyond. Do you think that's easy? That's an easy road.
Oh, can I use curse words on here?
Yeah, you were
Heck
fine.
no. Heck no. Um, I don't, most people, the whole theme in today, like the world of sales leadership is like, hey, you're a great performer. Why don't you go be our sales leader? Like, what? On what planet is that experience even relevant? Like, I do think it's valid to say that someone should have selling experience, but to think that that experience then qualifies you with nothing else to then be the manager or leader of a team is so misguided. And it's why so many organizations struggle, when they make that, they try to make that move. It's always the go-to move too. It's kind of, I mean, it's a little
Oh
bit
yeah, well,
funny.
it's the easy button, right? And listen, when
Um,
I point one finger, I got four going back at me. Everybody wants the easy button, and we do a lot of work with trying to coach up a sales leader, right? That it was a great individual producer. Got and my analogy is on Friday they're your number one salesperson. You promote them on Friday. On Monday they're the sales leader. Nothing happened except for the weekend, right? No training. There, it goes back to your motivation, right? In your TTI, their motivations are completely different. As a sales leader, you have to have different motivations versus an individual producer. Not saying that you don't want your team to be successful, but you still also gravitate towards individual producers are me centric historically, and so I see it
which
time and
they
time
should
again.
be.
Uh,
They should be me
Right. Yeah.
like
Those
right.
that aren't, right, have bigger problems, right? There's a bigger fish to fry. You're right on that too, because sometimes organizations won't hire those people. They'll scare some organizations away. But I see it. I always like to ask that question just to kind of do my checks and balances. And I asked it once, and the person said, "Well, everybody deserves a career path," and I'm like, well, yeah, but not if it's going to blow up the organization. It's like really that's our discussion point is, well, everybody deserves a career path. Yeah, everybody does, but for some, putting them in the wrong job. Like
Yeah.
not everybody should be a surgeon. Only people that really go into long hours of medical school and residency and beyond.
And
Um,
yeah. And
Go
I
ahead.
did kind of come up through that. I mean, I kind of went
Yeah,
on
you
that
came up
path.
through the ranks, but my guess is that you spent a lot of time on educating yourself.
Personally, yes, but I was
Yeah,
super motivated and I'm very like I get made fun of because I love all the self-help business books. Like that's what I
sure.
right. And so and I did have access to Sandler selling and I did a Sandler leadership program early on in my career. So I did have some exposure to some resources and training that my organization supported, but there was nothing formal about it. Everything that I did was self-directed. I had to ask for it. I had to, I mean, and probably as why I have ended up where I am today, right? Because of that self
Yeah.
drive and ability to do that. But I don't think that that's the vast majority of the population.
Probably not. Probably not. And most salespeople, they kind of like what they're doing and they're just going to stay into that. All right. So we don't like what's new and improved for 2025. I got it. I got you. I respect that. But what are you focusing on? What's your focus for 2025? What's your goal for 2025?
Yeah. So as I go into 2025, so I've been doing this almost 5 years. Started out working more with, I would say, smaller businesses that are had a handful of salespeople that are, don't necessarily have that in-house leader, and they were thinking
Right.
about promoting their top person to the sales leader, but they didn't end up doing that, right? Some variation of that. So now, as I've grown in this business, I've really, started to shift my focus to a bit larger companies, which is really where my background is from,
Mhm.
working with those, close to six-figure $1 million, $100 million accounts. Um, not necessarily all that big, but companies that tend to have, I would like to focus on companies that have probably sales leadership or even multiple sales leaders in place and are really looking for more of a strategic eye, and or how do they take this business and evolve it from where it's at, where the people who are currently doing the day-to-day continue doing the day-to-day. I'm not necessarily involved in that. I'm helping to maximize what they're doing. I like doing CRM work, operationalizing the CRM and getting that really functioning. And a lot of times these sales leaders are awesome people that have been with their company for a long time. They know all the ins and outs, but they're not
Sure.
necessarily looking at things from a longer range perspective. They're in the day to day. And
Yeah.
so I'm really looking to, move my business into that realm and start working with companies that are, have that kind of or meet that criteria and are really, I'm not there to take anyone's job. I'm not there to even necessarily be there long term. It's more of a shift it's a concentrated effort for a period of time to really refocus the organization in
Yeah.
certain ways.
In and out and get them to where they need to go, and then maybe do a checkpoint every, come in every quarter. All right. So how do people find you? If I'm struggling with that, right, and I got to listen, there isn't a business that I look at that doesn't have a problem with their CRM, right? Or just I need some high level visibility, some strategic direction in my sales side, or I just want to learn, I just want to learn from you. How do they reach out to you?
Um, Two options: LinkedIn, you can look up French Sales Solutions, and or
Okay.
Melanie French, you can find me, or my website, FrenchSalesSolutions.com.
Okay. Get on her mailing list. She does a weekly email, right? I think it comes out on Saturday,
Yep.
and it's very good. I learned something from it. And get on or watch her LinkedIn post. I always enjoy your LinkedIn post. You always make me think. They're quick, right? They're 30 to 45 seconds, and so they're good. So follow her on LinkedIn. Melanie French will have everything in the show notes. Find her, get on her email list. But most importantly, folks, if you got problems on the sales side, you got to take care of it, right? It ain't going to happen. Ostriching it and thinking it's going to hopium, thinking it's going to be better just with more leads or putting an SDR on or something like that. You got to strategically think about your business. And if you're a business owner and you're strategically thinking about having a podcast, you need to reach out to the folks at Pina Colada Media. They do everything for you. They're phenomenal. They just listen. You want to bond with your customers. You want to learn from. I learned 5 things from Melanie, which just makes me better and allows me to have a different approach when I have my client conversations. Having a podcast is really crazy smart. It's a good thing to do for your business. So reach out to the folks at Pina Colada Media. They're going to take care of everything for you. Melanie, it was a joy. Great to have you on. As always, thanks for classing us up
Yes. Thanks for
and
having me.
making it a great sales conversation. And I wish you a wonderful Christmas holiday, whatever and however you celebrate it.
Yes. Same to you.
Take care, folks.
Thanks for tuning in to Sales Mavericks and Marketing Rebels. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Keep pushing the limits in your business. And remember, the Mavericks and Rebels are always ahead of the game. Catch you next time.